Rabbi Chaim, I'm not hearing anything. Are you on mute by any chance? You're on mute.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was on mute. Okay, thank you for joining from close, from far. We are holding here in the Gemara in Mesechta, Megillah, Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph 16a, near the very, very bottom of the page. The second to last line on the page, the Gemara will now, for a while actually, digress, go into another total different subject, although it will connect it back to where we're up to in explaining the Megillah. But the Gemara will now wrap up its explanation of the Megillah. It's only going to explain maybe another 3 or 4 different psukim in the Megillah. And also the parak, the chapter of Gemara, is also wrapping up. So for now, for about a full amud, full page, or half a page, the Gemara will now digress and talk about not the story of Purim, but rather the story of Yosef and his brothers. Why Yosef and his brothers? Well, it's a lot of connections that Yosef and his brothers have to the story of Purim. And as we go throughout the Megillah, we'll see more and more connections to it. But one of the foremost being is that Binyamin, who was Yosef's only full brother, was an ancestor of Mordechai, the Jew. So, being that Yosef had a special place in his heart for Binyamin, and we'll have several examples of that, every one of those details which were connected with Yosef and Binyamin are also connected with what happened later on with Mordechai and the rest of the Jews, Mordechai and Haman. So the Gemara will digress now for a short time in the middle. Now, if we're holding here in the Megillah, at the very end of chapter 7, the last verse was Vayislu as Haman, and they hang Haman ala eitz asher heichen Mordechai, on the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordechai. V'chamas hamelech shachacha, and the king's anger abated; it calmed down. And the Gemara explained the king had 2 angers. He was angry about Haman giving him advice to kill Vashti. He was angry at Haman trying to assault his queen, and both of the angers were assuaged. In addition, the anger of Hashem against the Jewish people for serving to the idol during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and the anger of the king, 2 different kings, were both calmed down. So it uses the word shachacha instead of shoich with 1 chaf, which means to calm down. It was a double calming down. The next part that the Megillah will actually, that the Gemara will actually explain, is going to be much, much further down in the Megillah. Not even in the next chapter. It's going to skip a full parak, a full chapter, and go to chapter 9, longest chapter in the Megillah. And it's going to skip all the way to there. So before we get to that part, let's read a little bit of the Megillah. We'll bring 1 or 2 explanations, biurim, of the Rebbe on the Megillah. It says, Bayoimahu, on that day. So we're talking about the first day of Chol HaMoed, Pesach. Tes Zayin, second day of Pesach, Tes Zayin Nisan. And we're holding Daf Tes Zayin. King Achashverosh gave to Queen Esther as Beis Haman Serer Yehudim, the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Mordechai ba lifnei HaMelech Hegid Esther Mahula. And now Mordechai no longer had to be relegated to being by the king's gate outside of the palace. Mordechai now came in front of the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. Vayasar melech es tabata esher hever mir Haman. The king took off his ring, which he had removed from Haman. Vayitna leMordechai, and he gave it to Mordechai. Vatosem Esther es Mordechai al beis Haman. And Esther placed Mordechai in charge of Haman's house. Now, Haman, we learned before, was immensely wealthy. He had to support a huge family. He was able to bribe the king with immense amounts of money. But there's a question, very strong question asked by Rav Sadia Gaon. How was it possible for Mordechai to take possession of Haman's house? Haman came from Amalek. Amalek is a nation we were commanded to destroy, and Timche Zecher Amalek, to destroy every remnant of Amalek. Even if they had an animal and the animal is known to be an Amaleki animal, you have to destroy it, you have to kill it.
Could it be actually that because actually it's inherently mixed up the nations, that even though he was an Amaleki, but halachically he wasn't considered to be, so therefore, defending yourself against an Amaleki, but you can take his stuff, and you can also convert him to Judaism if you will be sincere, as actually happened with Haman's, with descendants of Haman.
Okay, that's a good thing, but I think we know for a fact, it says we call him Ha'agagi. He was from Agag. Maybe they had DNA testing special for Haman's family. I don't know.
So going back, Esther told the king what Mordecai was to her.
Yeah.
What he didn't say he's my husband.
Right. So we
what
said
did he say?
he's my cousin. I mean, yeah, it would probably be very risky for Mordechai to say that we're married, and Esther is actually actively, being intimate with Mordechai. Although at this point they were now forbidden with each other because Esther already came to the king of her own free will.
Didn't some of Haman's descendants convert?
Yes, we learned that before, that his descendants learned Torah in Bnei Brak. He had 208 sons. Many of them had to go beg for food. Some of them were killed. But from his descendants, and Rameir, I think, came from him. Rameir and Rebbe Kiva, perhaps, also.
Rameir was descended from Emperor Nero.
Emperor Nero?
And he had trusted from Roman Yechid.
But where did Emperor Nero come from? And maybe from Haman. But some of the great, I'm saying the Tanaim came from Haman.
But if the decree was made, you have to wipe them all out.
Right.
How then all of a sudden was it stopped? I mean, they were able to. Okay.
It's a good question. Maybe by converting to Judaism, it's a sure way of destroying the remnant of Amalek. So the answer, in a simple sense, is that it's only on things which have the title, the name Amalek on there. Things which don't have the name Amalek could be, for example, an animal, which is a living thing, has to be killed if it belonged to Amalek. But if it's a different object, like a table, as long as you remove any Amaleki type of connections, you're allowed to use it. Interesting, when Israel was founded, the most common gun they used was actually one of the German guns from World War II. The Germans produced millions of them, and there was surplus all over. And so it ended up being that they sort of used from Amalek, and they're able to use the tools of Amalek in order to help out the Jewish nation. Now, Haman, his source comes from Agag. Agag was the king of Amalek, who Shaul, the first Jewish king, was supposed to kill. And Shaul had mercy on him, and he kept him alive. Because he was begging Shaul, please don't kill me, until Shmuel came, and Shmuel says, did you kill everybody? He says, yes, I killed everyone besides the king. I killed all the men besides the king. And there was one night that the king of Amalek, Agag, was left alive. And during that night, he was incarcerated in a prison, in a pit. But during that night, they managed to lower down a Amaleki woman into the pit, and he was able to make her pregnant that night. And from there, a descendant of her was Haman. So because Shaul was not diligent in killing Agag right away, eventually Haman came out later on. So if Mordechai, again, he's a descendant of Shaul, and he's coming to finish up the job. It's very interesting. When, in Cincinnati, they closed down, Baruch Hashem, they had the Reform College called the Hebrew Theological Seminary. Okay, got the name right. Hebrew Theological Seminary. It's a Reform college for making quote unquote rabbis.
They also have actually yeshiva too. It's very interesting. There's solid yeshiva and they also had reform too.
So when the Rebbe sent a shliach, his name is Rebbe Kalmanson, to Cincinnati in the 1980s. So the Rebbe wrote him a very interesting note, very unique note. I've never seen anything like this. In the year 1843, the Tzemach Tzedek, there was a conference of rabbis, which was called on by the Russian government, and they wanted to make many changes in chinuch, in Judaism. It was put together, the brainchild of what's called the Maskilim, the Enlightenment, started by Mendelssohn in Germany, and Mendelssohn and other people. And there's Dr. Stern involved. And in Russia, the leader of the Enlightenment in Russia, his name was Dr. Lilienthal.
Yes, he became reformed.
He became reformed, correct.
Good.
And he many things happened, but he managed to convince the Russian government to pay a few million ruble to print textbooks that are going to become compulsory in every single cheder. And then you can never have a teacher in a cheder unless he first went to college and got a proper degree. And he wanted to make many reforms in Yiddishkeit, and Tzemach Tzedek was fighting tooth and nail about it. And you can read about it, and it was called the Tzemach Tzedek and the Haskalah. The government called was just an official meeting in order to get these things approved. And Tzemach Tzedek fought against it tooth and nail. He spoke very strongly and openly, and he says, if the government's going to support this, the government will have a downfall. There will be a revolution in Russia. He was arrested 22 times throughout this conference, which was supposed to take, I think, 4 weeks, and ended up taking 6 months.
Was this a punishment? Was from heaven?
The Russian government arrested him. Every time Tzemach Tzedek would speak out strongly.
But who predicted the Russian would have?
Tzemach Tzedek.
But why? Did he seem to? Was it some heavenly decree?
Yeah, he said if you're going to make a decree against Jewish education, you'll be a revolution within 50 years. Oh. He say openly, and the Tsar is actually wearing undercover clothes, incognito at that session. It was in the Russian parliament, and he made a message to have Tzemach Tzedek arrested for treason. Miraculously, he was saved. But this went on for a long time, this conference of rabbis.
And which year was this?
1843.
Bill Trump is catching up with him. That's the third time now.
Now, there was actually two conferences, the 1843 and then the 1840, 5 years later, 1848. 1848 was the 1848 one was a little shorter, and Tzemach Tzedek was already a lot more respected. But the 1843 one, there was Dr. Lilienthal. He was the main antagonizer, you could say. At the end of the entire conference, what ended up happening is not a single one of the reforms were passed. And Dr. Lilienthal himself, there was a warrant out for his arrest for having swindled the government of millions of ruble, and he had to flee the country. And the entire Haskalah in Russia fell apart. Baruch Hashem. That's what ended up being at the end of this conference.
But the Tzemach Tzedek's prophecy still came through, no?
Right, but Tzemach Tzedek said it will be within 50 years, it will be a revolution. It took a little longer than that. Right, this is 1843, and the next one was 1848.
It was a conditional prophecy that if you're going to be having,
if you're going to make these reforms, then there will be a revolution within the country.
Yeah, it said they had to wait actually for a czar, or who was like,
at any rate,
actually too weak.
Whatever, all these things.
Yeah.
But so the Rebbe wrote to Rabbi Kalmanson when he's moving to Cincinnati, and he says that Lilienthal, Professor Lilienthal, after he had to escape Russia, it's so interesting. You read the accounts of this meeting, and Lilienthal accuses the Tzemach Tzedek openly in front of the Russian parliament. And he says, because of you, wherever I go in Russia, every town in Russia and Poland and in Galicia and everywhere I go, as soon as I walk in, all the kids start throwing things at me and he says, Koifer, get out of here, get out of our country, Mesis, Mediach, leave. He says, I came to shul to speak, and as soon as people heard who I am, right away the whole shul attacked me, and if not for like the rabbi of the shul protecting me, I would have got hurt. And it's all because of you. Expecting Tzemach Tzedek to now back down. But so he says this Lilienthal, he ran away from Russia and he came to the United States and he came to Cincinnati. He says, and that's why the Rebbe says the reform was so strong in Cincinnati because Lilienthal was there. And the Rebbe says now the grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek, who bears his name, which is a Rebbe, and the same name as the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Rebbe is a great-great-grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek, is now going to finish off the job that his grandfather started. I mean, the Rebbe says that he's sending him as a shliach to Cincinnati to finish off the job that the Tzemach Tzedek started. And last year, it was a day of Gimel Tammuz, actually. The Hebrew Theological Seminary was actually closed for good. It's open, it's closed down, and it's closed forever now. What?
Last year,
Last year, Gimel Tammuz.
so the no more reform,
The Hebrew Theological Seminary. No seminary for them. They had many scandals of their professors and doing different. You could read them up on them online, and they weren't being. Yeah.
And so now actually you
So in a similar sense over here.
and so now actually you have a new thing issue where you have people, organization calling themselves Orthodox, but it's like they do all sorts of stuff. In every generation, you have, your kofrim that you have to deal with.
In a similar sense, so Mordechai is a grandson of Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech, he was supposed to do a job to destroy Amalek, but he didn't complete the job, right?
Yeah, sure.
He didn't kill Agag. As a result, he still had a descendant, Haman. So now Mordechai, who's a descendant of Shaul, has to go complete the job that Shaul HaMelech did. So part of completing the job of Shaul HaMelech did should have been to destroy Amalek. Shaul destroyed all the objects that Amalek owned. Instead, we see that Mordechai didn't destroy everything. Instead, he took over. He took it over. He took it and he acquired it.
If it was involving, his possessions were involved in a vote of Zorah, you would have to destroy them.
Correct.
I
So
guess he didn't do it then.
So but how could he do it? So Reb Yitzchak Perlo explains like this. He says after Haman was killed, the law was that anybody who's killed by the king, the crown would confiscate everything they owned. And that's the way it was always, up till recent times, that if someone's killed by the government confiscates everything. So Haman's estate no longer was owned by Haman, it was owned by the king. And the king is the one who gave it to Mordechai and Esther. Sort of like the Jews were commanded not to go to war against Ammon and Moab, but Sichon made a war with Ammon and Moab. He conquered their lands, and then the Jews conquered Sichon. So the Jews conquered Ammon and Moab's land through the intermediary of Sichon. So in a similar sense, Mordechai and Esther were able to take possession of Haman's house through the intermediary of Achashverosh. Achashverosh was the one who acquired it, and then they're only acquiring something that belongs to Achashverosh.
But it says it went through a conversion from Amaleki to Persian.
Correct.
Become Jew.
Correct. We can learn a wonderful lesson from this. We know there's a mitzvah to publicize those who do a mitzvah. Someone gives tzedakah, you honor them, you make a big deal out of it. But you could say it's not a good thing. All you're doing is feeding into the person's sense of entitlement, to his ego. So why should, Torah is all about being true and real, definitely altruistic. Why should you publicize someone who does a mitzvah? So the answer is there are times that Hashem wants it to be publicized in order that people should take an example from it. You should see it, you should learn from it, and you should do it as well. So it's a mitzvah to publicize those who do a mitzvah, even if there could be a possibility of someone could become arrogant from it.
Well, you have actually, it's like, if somebody donates, it has a name now, there are many, if you find people who do it, but at the same time, though, you may have some people who actually may be thinking more of the honor of having their name, and then, that it's wrong.
Yeah. In a similar sense, there's a story of the Tzemach Tzedek the Mittler Rebbe, that he made a rule that any chassid who comes to Lubavitch must stop by every single city on the way, every town, and repeat chassidus over there in that city. So there was one time that there was a chassid who came to the Mittler Rebbe complaining, saying that I have a gift, I could speak very well. Any city I go to, people listen to me, they enjoy it very much. But I'm starting to feel very good about myself, very arrogant. I'm feeling myself that I'm an important person. So Tzemach Tzedek answered him, you should become an onion, but you should still review chassidus, which means an onion is something that gives flavor to everything else, but the onion itself, nobody eats. You throw it out, correct? So he's saying that if you... Okay.
I mean, the usual person, but not me.
All right. So he's saying it's good to do a mitzvah, even if there's ulterior motives on the side. Because in the end, the light of the mitzvah will bring you back to do good. So this is what it means. How we could apply it to our service of Hashem. If a person says, I don't want to be so careful, I don't want to do the best mitzvah, it shouldn't look like I'm showing off. So we could see that just like the house of Haman, which was from Amalek, the worst of the worst, but it was able to be, you could say, purified through Achashverosh. So too, every single thing, even if it's a negative character trait, if you do a mitzvah with it, that's a way of purifying it. So let's learn a little Gemara. It's already 11:30, but not learning any Gemara is something that we can't do. So it says, Lekulam Nasan Leish Chalifos Smalis. This is, we might as well move it over here, to the front over here. When after the story of Yosef and his brothers, Yosef demanded that the brothers bring Binyamin. So the brothers went back to Eretz Yisrael and they had to convince Yaakov to let Binyamin come to Egypt. So Yosef, the brothers with Binyamin come back down to Egypt. When they come down, Yosef takes his magic cup, his goblet, pretends that he knows magic, and he says, all your names are this, you're the oldest, you're the this, you're the that. Everyone should sit at their own table. And he divides 4 tables, one for 6 brothers, one for 2 brothers, one for 2 brothers. Then he says, Binyamin has no mother, I have no mother, and he makes a special table just for him and Binyamin. So as it says over here, read these 3 psukim. And they sat, and he set bread separately for him and for the brothers, and for the Egyptians separately, because the Egyptians would not eat together with the Hebrews.
Yeah, they were racist.
Because they were racist, it's abomination for them to eat with the Hebrews, right? Because they would eat meat, and the Egyptians would not eat any meat, because they would say that sheep are holy, are sacred.
And that's why it was such a big deal for Pharaoh to give his daughter from Shlomo Melech, but he was worried about Shlomo Melech. So he said that the heck with racism, I'll give you my daughter.
Exactly. It says, Yeshu lefanav, they sat in front of him. Habechar kibchirasai vatzar kitzirasai. Yosef, he arranged them according to age, from older to younger. Vayismo anashim ishrei ayun. They all look with astonishment. How does this man know who's older and who's younger? And he had portions brought in front of him, portions of food. Vaterev masas Binyamin mimasas kulam chamesh yados. And Binyamin's portion was larger than the other portions of the brothers, 5 times as much. It says, Vayishtu vayishkuru imo, they ate and they drank wine and became intoxicated with him. So this is before Yosef revealed himself to his brothers. By the meal they're having, it's the first time they actually ever sat down to drink wine in 22 years. From the time Yosef was sold, the brothers stopped drinking wine. And now Yosef also stopped drinking wine. He was sad for his father. They were sad for their father. And now, the first time in 22 years, they all drank wine and they all became drunk together with Yosef. But Yosef already gave Binyamin, at this point, chamesh yadas, 5 times the amount what everybody else, of all the other brothers got.
This was food.
This is food and drink, correct. Then you have the Torah continues telling us that when they left, Yosef smuggled their money of the brothers back in, and as well as his magic goblet, he put into Binyamin's sack. And they left Egypt, the brothers going back to Israel, and before they could leave Egypt, they just left the city limits. Yosef's son, or his assistant, catches up with him and he says, "You're summoned back right away. You all are thieves. You stole my master's goblet." They said it's impossible. They started looking through all the sacks, and the brothers like, "Look, no one stole anything." And they found Yosef's cup in Binyamin's sack. And they all came back now in front of Yosef. And then starts Parshas Vayigash. Yehuda approaches Yosef and he says, "Take me as a slave instead of Binyamin." Now this is all a test. Yosef was sold as a slave by his brothers, wants to see if his brothers did teshuvah. Are they going to stand up for Binyamin? If Binyamin's about to be sold into slavery, will they stand up to try protecting him? And eventually he sees that they're ready to literally go to war, to attack Egypt, to save Binyamin. Yosef cannot hold himself back anymore. And he says, all the Egyptians leave. He started crying and he says, "Ani Yosef ha'od avichai." I am Joseph. My father is alive. And later on, he tells the brothers, "Calm down. I'm not angry with you that you sold me as a slave, because as part of Hashem's plan to save the Jewish nation." Continue. We'll skip a little bit to where we're holding. But now Yosef is reunited with his brothers. It says, and he fell on his brother Binyamin's neck and wept, and Binyamin wept on his neck. We'll learn about this over here as well.
There was no need actually, for Yosef, to take revenge, and sufficient revenge in that he was actually the ruler, and his brothers see, oh my goodness, it came true. So if you want to call it revenge, that's revenge.
It's a good shot.
Yeah.
And he says, "I could prove to you." He gave them many different proofs that he's actually Yosef. He's speaking to them in Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue. He showed them his bris milah. He told them his last conversation he had with Yaakov. He says, "Hurry up, bring Yaakov down to Egypt." He gave them wagons. Wagons were the last thing he was learning about with Yaakov, was Egla Rufa. And then he says, then he did something which could seem very unprudent, which is Pasuk Hatzvi-Bais, L'kulam nasan le'ish chalifas smalis. To every one of the brothers, he gave a change or changes of clothes as a present. U'leBinyamin, and to his brother Binyamin, nasan shloish meyes kesef, v'chamesh chalifas smalis. He gave 300 pieces of silver as a gift and 5 changes of clothes. So he started. So once again, we saw earlier, he gave Binyamin 5 times the amount of food that he gave to the other brothers. Once again, over here, he gave the brothers a set of clothes, and he gave Binyamin 5 sets of clothes. So he gave him 5 times as much, plus 300 silver coins. Says the Gemara, last line on the page of Tezayin Amud Aleph 16a. L'kulam nasan ish chalifas smalos, l'Binyamin nasan chamesh chalifas. All the brothers received 1 pair of clothes, And Binyamin received 5 pairs of clothes. Asked the Gemara, Efshar, is it possible? A davar shenitztar boy oisei tzaddik. The very thing from which the righteous man Yosef suffered, because Yaakov gave Yosef a colored, a striped cloak, and the brothers became jealous, and that resulted in them selling them as a slave to Egypt. So the very thing which caused Yosef to become, brothers to become jealous of Yosef, next page, Yikashal boy, that Yosef himself stumbled. The problem was that Yaakov showed favoritism to one brother over another. So is Yosef also making the same mistake, stumbling in the same thing and showing favoritism to Binyamin over the other brothers? He, better than any one of the other brothers, should know what disastrous results could come from this. How could he not be careful with this? Answers the Gemara, the Amar Rav Chasya, Amar Rav Chama. This is part of the question. Rav Chama, the son of Goria. Rav Chama bar Goria said in the name of Rav, B'shvil mishkal shnei slayim, milas shehosev Yaakov liYosef mishar echav, because of a garment which had the weight of 2 selah, a certain weight of a coin. A selah is about 17 grams. So Shnei Slaim doesn't mean necessarily it was a garment that weighed 34 grams, because it doesn't make sense you have such a thin garment, right? 34 grams is about the weight of, 17 paper clips. It doesn't make sense that he has such a light garment. Pasim can mean a palm. It could be that there was a glove attached to the garment, which that weighed 17 slayim, but not the entire garment. But what he means at any rate is that he had a garment which was very light. The material was not heavy. And milas means very clean, high quality wool. Because of that, Shahoisif Yaakov li Yosef, which Lishar Echav, Mishar Echav, Yaakov favored Yosef over his other brothers by giving him this garment. So the brothers became jealous of Yosef, and they sold him as a slave to Egypt. V'niskalgal hadavar, v'yardu laveseinu lemitzrayim, and eventually things continued from there. And it happened that as a result of all that, our forefathers became slaves to Paro in Egypt, all as a domino effect, what happens one after the next from Yaakov showing favoritism to Yosef. So how could Yosef himself show favoritism to his brother Binyamin and give him 5 times the amount that he gave to his other brothers?
Blood-wise, he was closer. They shared the same mother. There's a little bit.
Very good. So Mr. Minsky is saying a very valid point, which the Marsha says over here. So Baruch Hashem, he's in very good company, and you're good company. He says Yosef is a complete, full blood brother with Binyamin. He shares a mother. With the other Shvatim, other brothers, he only shares a father. But with him, it makes sense that he should favor him. He shares a brother. So the Marsha answers, we see throughout this entire story, the anecdote, Yosef's going above and beyond, out of his way, to show his brothers how he's not upset at them. He gave them presents. He tries comforting them and telling them, don't be upset. I'm not upset at you that you were sold me as a slave. Hashem did it. And he's really going out of his way to sort of make up with his brothers, to make his brothers not jealous. That's what he's trying to do, not be angry and not be embarrassed that they sold him as a slave. So why would he do something that would be able to cause jealousy? That's how the Marsha answers. There's another sefer called the Rosh Yosef, which says, if he wanted to show favoritism to his brother, let him give Binyamin double, 2 garments. And that's enough to show that, enough to show favoritism. but he doubled and he doubled the double, plus he gave more, right? He gave 5 times the amount. So you can see he's not just doing it only because he's related, but because he's favoring his brother over the other. So that's already could cause jealousy. The fact that he's giving so much more to his brother as opposed to just double.
But at the same time, I was also thinking, if let's say, we gave actually, let's say 5 times the amount given to, let's say, God, that would be like, how come you're giving it to God? But
Right.
here he's giving to his baby brother. So maybe it's like people could feel, well, it's not an insult to us.
Right.
You know, he loves his kid brother, so he's giving.
Right. Right. You can say that. That's why you have these 2 answers, either why the huge amount, why 5 times the amount, or if he's going out of his way to make up with his brothers, to make him not feel bad, why do something that could be interpreted as being jealous of his brothers, making favoritism.
So why 5, I mean, is that related to the Chumash?
Why 5 times as much?
Yeah, why not 6 or 3?
So the why 5 times as much? We'll connect it to what it says in the Megillah. And Mordechai went out with 5 different garments in front of the king. The Megillah lists 5 different royal garments that he wore. So it's a reward for those 5. I mean, it's in general, the idea of, we'll get into this maybe another time, maybe tomorrow when we'll go through this more in depth, but why specifically 5? When Yaakov gave a present to Yosef, wasn't only because of favoritism. There's a lot more at play over there. In short, it says, Chassidus explains this, Alter Rebbe, the Sfas Emes explains this, the Gra explains this, Cham Sofer explains this, that Yosef was unique among all the brothers because Yosef was able to be a king in Egypt and still be a tzaddik. It's called Eidos B'Yosef, tzaddik Yesod Olam. He's a level of Yesod. He's one of the guests to Shpizin. None of the other Shvatim tribes are. Because Yosef was called the tzaddik Elyon. He's a much higher level than his brothers. His brothers, they had to be inside. They had to be shepherds, stay away from the world. They weren't able to elevate the world. And Yosef's brothers were. So Yosef was the one who was able to be in Egypt, in the most depraved society in the world, and still be a tzaddik, holy over there, righteous. And not just that, to raise his children in the way of Torah, and to affect the entire world, causing them to get a bris and all, and things like that.
He also had his father's personality a lot. His father actually, it seems actually Rachel, he cries.
Correct.
You know, Yosef, you see, he cries. You know.
Right. I see that. Yeah. I see that. So, yeah, it's true.
Did he have any conflict with marrying the daughter of Potiphar?
Potiphar?
Yeah. Because she wasn't Jewish and they were Avodah Zarah type people and everything. Not only that, I'd have to deal with his mother-in-law.
So that's
I'm not talking in normal sense. This is a mother-in-law that accused him of things.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any commentary on
This is a good question. Well, it said that Potiphar was actually the daughter, was actually his niece. Remember Shechem violated Dinah? So it said that Dinah had a baby, and that baby was taken by an angel, Malach, and raised in the house of Potiphar. So an angel took the baby which was born from Dinah and it was raised in the house of Potiphar. So it was actually his niece, the daughter of Dinah. But it says about all the Shvatim, all the tribes, they all married Canaanite women, but they were converted for those.
So you didn't have to worry about they didn't worry about Yichus in those days. You know, okay.
They obviously did. I'm saying Yitzchak was sent to you had to find someone from his own family, but it wasn't saying per se a Mitzri, an Egyptian per se, meaning because Mitzrayim came from Cham. Cham was a cursed son of Noach, so they wouldn't marry someone from Cham. So Yosef didn't really marry per se. It says even Potiphar says wasn't able to have children. He wasn't. He was called Potiphera. Originally, it was Potiphar and became Potiphera because he became impotent, couldn't have children.
Potiphera.
Original was Potiphar, and then Potiphera. Farah means cut off.
Oh.
It's also feminine.
Yes, right.
Oh, yeah.
So since Yosef had a very strong mission to do, so Yosef was given the present by his father of the colored coat, the colored garment, because Yosef had to be given extra koyach, extra strength and extra power by his father, by Yaakov. Right? Similar, Yaakov, the blessings are giving an extra power. You know, you have a high mission. You can have you want to get from place A to place B. You could give regular fuel to a car. If you want to go with a rocket ship, you need high level fuel. I'm saying Yosef had a very special mission. You have to have very special koichas, very special powers. Similar, our neshama comes to the body, comes down to this world. Mashbi Moiseh, Hashem makes the soul swear to be a tzaddik. Masbin, Tanya explains, you give a lot of power, koyach, strength to this neshama to do its mission. Malachim, angels, don't have the ability to be in this world and do mitzvahs. They tried it once, it didn't turn out too well. It says in the times of Chumash Bereshis, right? They came down to this world as in the form of people, and they were the biggest sinners in the world. Right? Shamchazai, Azazel, the giants. So why? Because only neshama, only a soul has the power to be in this world and still not sin and do mitzvahs, right? So you have extra power, extra koyach being given to Yosef by his father. In turn, we're going to have a soon in the Gemara. You'll see that Yosef gave to his brother Binyamin all that extra power, the extra koyach too, because his descendant will be Mordechai, and Mordechai, unlike the rest of the Jews who were in the city of Shushan, Mordechai was in Shushan Habira, by the king's gate. He was running in the king's palace. We'll see at the very end of the Megillah, says the other sages separated themselves from Mordechai because they're saying, you're a member of Sanhedrin? You're busy in the king's palace the whole day. You're not worthy of being a member of Sanhedrin. And they separated himself from Mordechai. Right? So Mordechai was like, he had the same character trait as Yosef, being busy in the king's palace and the depravity of the world that was going on back then. You can imagine how, right? We've seen exactly what a upstanding role model Achashverosh was, all of his beauty pageants and things that he's done. And Mordechai had to deal with someone like that the whole day. You're dealing with royal drama. We have guys like Haman and all these people and Haggai and all these Charvainas, the Charvaina and Shtetl. He has to deal with all this stuff going on. Where does he get the koyach from? The power to do it. So that's why, specifically to Binyamin, Yosef gave 5 times the amount, because he needs much more koyach, he needs much more power, much more strength than the rest of the brothers. And that's why he gave 5 times the amount. And why 5 times? It says 5 levels of the neshama. You have to strengthen every single part. But that's why Binyamin received much more, and that's why Yosef received much more from Yaakov in turn as well. So it's not just a drama, a family drama with showing favoritism and one to the other. There's many deeper reasons and levels to everything that these great tzaddikim have done.
So they were given the strength to deal with problems in life.
Right, deal with the outside world and still rise above it. Right, just to swim through the current and not just follow the current. Okay, we'll pause over here. We'll try squeezing in maybe 10 minutes of Mesechta Midddos. Let's do a new share. New share. Not that the share is new, but that sharing a new thing on the screen. Okay. So now in the Beis HaMikdash, we're learning about the women's court, an area called the Ezras Nashim, the women's court. The women's court was the area of the Beis Hamikdash over here. This is actually following the view of the Rush. Very interesting. This big area over here, this is called the Ezras Nashim, the women's court. It's called the women's court because in general, that was a place where women were allowed to go unless they were bringing a karban, bringing a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash. It was the largest of all the courts in the Beis Hamikdash. The size was it was a square, 135 cubits by 135 cubits, about 270 feet by 270 feet. And there were 4 chambers in the 4 corners. But you see over here, even in this on this Temple Institute site, you'll have both opinions how these 4 chambers were.
What was the purpose of a woman's courtyard? Is it because?
It was called the women's courtyard, but it's for men and women. It wasn't. It was just a level. Certain people, which were tamei, can only go into certain parts, into certain areas of the Beis Hamikdash. So I don't think it was necessarily only for women.
It was like a mechitza in the Beis Hamikdash.
They didn't have really a mechitza in the Beis Hamikdash, except on it's brought down. They had it on the nights of Sukkot. They had platforms up in the air, and had like sort of balconies up in the air for the woman to stand and to observe the dancing that's going on the bottom. But it's very interesting here, even in this drawing, you have 2 different opinions how these 4 chambers were. There are 4 chambers in the 4 corners. And I'll bring this up over here. No, not this one. Mesechta Midddos. If they could see this. All right, so you see these 4 corners of the 4 chambers at the inside of the chambers. There's other opinion at the four chambers were on the outside. It's the opinion of the Rush. So did they take up space inside this courtyard or outside the courtyard? There's 2 opinions in that. Correct. One is that the 4 chambers were on the inside, and one is that the 4 chambers were on the outside. What were these 4 chambers? So let's go back to Mesechta Midddos. What were these 4 chambers? You see, in this drawing, the 4 chambers are made on the outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Here they're made on the inside. So what were they used for? Shal arbayim amma. Each one was 40 amas by 40 amas. So about each one was about 80 feet by 80 feet. And they were uncovered. They were not covered, all of these chambers. What were they used for? In the 3rd Beis Hamikdash, you will have it as well. Shenemar v'yitzeini al chatzer chitzayna v'avireini al arba miktzay chatzer v'ni chatzer miktzay chatzer miktzay chatzer b'amar miktzay chatzer chatzurei chatzeres keturas and keturas einam keturas. As it says that there were 4 chambers. Yecheskel saw a vision of a 3rd Beis Hamikdash. There are 4 chambers which were not covered with a roof. Ma hayu mashamshis. What were the 4 chambers for? So Draimis Mizrachis Yehosha Lishkas Hanizirim. So the first one was the chamber of the Nazirim. A Nazir is someone who wants to make themselves holy for Hashem and not to drink wine or become impure to a dead person, and to grow not to cut their hair. So when they finished their term of a Nazir, they will go into the Beis Hamikdash. They would cut their hair, and they would cook. They would burn their hair, and they would bring a carbon, and the hair would be thrown into the fire that's cooking the carbon. So Shasham is zirim mevashal neshalmein megachem sa'arim. So the Nazir, they would burn their hairs, and they would cut their hair, and they would cook their karbanas in this corner in the Lishkas HaNazir, in the Nazir court. And they would take their hair, and they would burn it underneath the pot where the karbanas are being shechta, karbanas are being slaughtered. The carbon is being cooked. Next one. Mizrachas Svainis, the northeastern chamber. He had Kohanim who were not fit to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, so they would be serving in other ways. They would help out in the Beis HaMikdash, and what they would do, they would check the wood in order to make sure that the wood which was being brought on the Mizbeach would not have any I'll just go like this. I'll just go like this. To make sure there's no worms in the wood.
What kind of worm would go into the?
If you remember, we learned at the end of Mesechta Tainus that the last date they were able to chop wood for the Mizbeach was the 15th of Av. It had to be dry, because once it starts getting moisture, there could be worms in the wood.
These worms, I don't know what the word is, impart tuma, these things, or?
So I'm not sure. I don't think necessarily would impart tuma per se.
Burning it,
Right, but it's not the highest quality, right? And for the Mizbeach, he needed only the best of the best.
So it was cooked in a pot, it wasn't roasted?
Right. The carbon shlamim, the peace sacrifice, was cooked in a pot.
Those are. The hero just thrown into the.
Right, the hair was thrown into the fire. There is a drawing somewhere on the website. I'll have to find it. Fine, let's go through just the other chambers. So we had two chambers. One is where the Kohanim who were unblemished, unfit to serve in the Beis HaMikdash would check the wood. One was where the Metzora, someone was a Nazir, was able to cut his hair and purify himself. If there is a piece of wood that had a worm inside of it, it would be forbidden to be used for the Mizbeach. There was another chamber, the third chamber over here. It was called the chamber for the Mitzvah, a leper, someone who had leprosy. Over there was a mikveh where they were able to go to the mikveh on the 8th day. Before they were allowed to enter the Azara, they had to go to a mikveh over there. Now, it was interesting. They first had to enter. They weren't allowed to enter the Azara because they were still impure, but they had to put their thumbs into the Azara because there would be some of the blood from their carbon was sprinkled on their thumbs. So they had to go to the mikveh and then put their thumbs into the courtyard of the Azara. And there was also pots over there where they could cook the meat from their own carbon, their own sacrifices. Ma'arav is Draimis, the western, southern on this side. So this one, what was it being used for? I don't remember what it was used for. Abashal says, Sham hoisu hayu noisin yain v'shemen v'hoisu nikras lishkas be'shvanya. It was called the house of the oil because in this place they would keep all the oil and the wine for the Beis Hamikdash. Right, we'll pause over here for today. And Mir Hashem will continue tomorrow. Shkach, thank you for joining.